Hello, everybody. Today I am going to deal with the Ode to Autumn by John Keats, the Romantic poet. My lesson is divided into three parts. Lesson 1 will deal with John Keats. Lesson 2, an explanation of the poem. Lesson 3, an analysis. So let's begin with the life of John Keats. He was an English poet who mastered the art of writing vivid poetry with near perfect images and descriptions. He was orphaned at quite an early age. He lost his mother when he was 14, but he lost his father when he was 8. And he was the only caregiver to his three siblings. He was looked after by his grandmother and he had a guardian. The guardian wanted him to become an apothecary. An apothecary is a person who prepares medicine and drugs and sells them. For a livelihood, Keats also decided to undertake the training, but his heart was not in this trade. He wanted deeply and passionately to become a poet. Early on in school, he was encouraged by his headmaster and, more importantly, the headmaster's son, Cowden Clark, to read. In fact, he became a voracious reader because they introduced him to a library of books from the classics. So he continued reading books and translations. He was influenced to a large extent by Virgil, Spencer, Milton, Shakespeare, Wordsworth, Leigh Hunt, and Shelley. In fact, he also met Shelley and Coleridge, and he had a lot of academic and public discussions with Wordsworth, whom he partly agreed with. Byron was his arch enemy. Byron was an established aristocrat and a poet, so it was difficult to contend with Byron. Byron did not take him very seriously, but he took Byron as his rival very seriously. One of the greatest influences and important friend in his life was Leigh Hunt, who ran a journal called the Examiner and who was talking about social concerns and political ideas through Examiner. Keats got his political education more or less from Leigh Hunt. Not only did he become his friend, but he also became his first publisher. What kind of a poet was he? As he understood loss and suffering at a very early age, most of his poems celebrate beauty. And as he knew the transience of life, he gave a lot of importance to sensory experiences. So his poetry was very, very sensual. While you read his poems, you can almost feel, touch, and enjoy the sounds that emerge from the poem. It's a virtual poem that you see in front of you. He had a very short career, but he experimented with a wide range of poetry. He wrote sonnets when Leigh Hunt was jailed, and he came out from jail. He wrote a sonnet in honor of Leigh Hunt. He wrote a Spenserian romance, imitation of Spenser. because he was his major influence in the early days. He tried his hand at a Miltonic epic, Hyperion, but he abandoned it later. It was about the Titans and the Olympians and the defeat of the Titans. He wrote Endemion, which was a massive project. Each part was 1,000 lines, and 4 parts of the poem became a 4,000-line poem. It was inspired by Fanny Brown, his muse, and it was about the love of the moon goddess for a mortal shepherd. So you find in the beginning, in this particular poem, there's a lot of idealism in it. So you find in the beginning that Keats tried to look at all that is very beautiful and positive in life. He also was very keen on re-examining the role of poetry in society. You can glean that from all the different letters that he has written to his friends. And he preferred to write poetry that came straight from the heart and from lived experience. That is where he was very close to Wordsworth. He was also close to the Romantic tradition because of his love for describing and celebrating nature. Blake was a precursor to the Romantic tradition, and you had Wordsworth and Coleridge, who tried to democratize literature through their need for imbibing simple language, spontaneous expressions, and deep emotions in the canvas and background of nature. So in that sense, he became a romantic poet too. And like the romantics, he understood that in the grand design of nature, man can live peacefully only if he develops a deep bond with nature. And that was where the beauty came from. He also understood, as I've mentioned earlier, about the transience of all these beautiful objects and life, that he tried to celebrate every moment through his poetry. He also is very well known for articulating one of the most important ideas for a creative mind, and that is the idea of negative capability, which he says he found in Shakespeare. The ability to pursue visions of artistic beauty, even when it can lead to intellectual confusion and uncertainty. That is negative capability. For example, in Shakespeare, one fool is not like the other, one protagonist is not like the other. Every character is distinct and different. But where do you find Shakespeare's worldview or Shakespeare, the person, in any of his plays or sonnets? Each one is completely developed on the strength of each character, where some might even contradict the other statements. Now, this ability to go beyond, to transcend your locations and your worldview, get into the skin of the character and be it, without letting yourself into the play or your views into the play, that is negative capability. And he admired it. If the writer enters his narrative, sometimes it can become didactic. But that creative literary work which does complete justice to the character, irrespective of whether the writer agrees with it or not, and with the writer refusing to enter the narrative through his ideas, that ability is negative capability. Actually, when he wrote Endemion, he had actually gone on a working tour to England, Scotland, the Lake District. Unfortunately, he cut short his walk and he came back because he had to look after Tom, his sick brother. He lost him, but in spite of that, he wrote this poem. That tells you that this creative energy that he had was unstoppable. And the challenges in life became more and more provocations to help him create. He published 3 volumes of poetry, all in all, about 54 poems, but managed to sell very few copies because people, his contemporaries, were not very kind to him and they did not relish his kind of poetry. It was much later that he came to be recognized as one of the finest poets of English literature. His greatest achievements are his odes. The Ode on a Grecian Urn and To Autumn to a Nightingale, they are masterpieces of the Romantic tradition as well as the English poetic tradition. In fact, people say he is to the odes what Shakespeare is to the sonnets. He contracted TB early in life, and his entire family were victims of consumption. And he also had to leave England and go to Rome in search of good weather and climate. This is where he stayed. In fact, there is a small memorial, Keats' memorial here. And he stayed in a place called the Spanish Steps, which has a beautiful fountain and is known for its mineral cures, the water there. Many people drink from it. But unfortunately, it did not help Keats. He suffered a lot and he passed away holding the hand of his friend Severin. He told his friend Severin that he did not want his name to be mentioned on his tomb. So here lies one whose name was written in water is a very simple epitaph for this young English poet. He died in 1821. His body is buried in Rome. This is about Keats, who was one of the masters of the second generation of Romantic poets. And he is given to English literature one of the finest poems through his odes, and we will be doing one of them in lesson 2. Thank you.